from New York to Adelaide to take us on a Maverick journey. Please welcome Scott Amyx.
Well, first of all, I want to say that it's an absolute honor to be here. And I used to think that I had a pretty colorful outfit, but I think Bryce outdone me today. Well, you're probably thinking, who is this bloke on stage from America? And why in the hell are we talking about space at an ag conference? I didn't know this was a Star Trek convention. Hey, I want a refund. Listen, I get it. I want a refund too. The thing is, on the surface, it may appear that I'm here to talk about space, but actually, I want to talk to you about the concept of inspiration from distant domain, using space as an example. According to science, we can supercharge ideas when we look to a distant domain. Raise your hand if you remember having one of those old Motorola flip phones. Yeah, okay. Before Apple, who thought about the possibility of taking a phone, adding the best of a Palm PDA, a BlackBerry, an iPod, and a computer that is connected to the internet, all in a single device? It was revolutionary. To help inspire out-of-the-box thinking, I really want to be able to introduce you to this notion of inspiration from distant domain. On the surface, it may appear that Australia may not be the hotbed of technology, like Silicon Valley. But when you actually look under the surface, Australia is, in fact, a global leader in exponential technologies, from quantum computing, robotics, and I'm excited to hear about all the innovation that's going to be happening in agriculture. You see, as an island nation, Australia naturally has a Maverick mindset. With limited resources, they've had to think outside of the box. And their ability to innovate has sparked incredible innovations, such as the patent for local wide area network that became the basis of Wi-Fi, to Google Maps, and the original program that was written in C++ by two brothers in Sydney, or the Parkes Observatory that received live images from the Apollo moon landing. Similarly, Australian farmers and producers are some of the most innovative people in the world. Just look around. You have to work with finite, limited resources and improvise. And yet, as you heard, create incredible products and on your way to reaching that $100 billion mark. My provocation to you today is that we need even more Maverick thinking to solve the world's greatest challenges. Later, I'm going to share with you a story of an Australian Maverick who is enabling connectivity where there is no mobile coverage. Let me first give you an overview of space. Why are we going to space? And what are some of the activities? NASA's Artemis program will send astronauts back to the moon, which we haven't done since 1972. Artemis 1, if you've been following the news, was a flyby test without humans, and it returned successfully end of last year. Artemis 2 is a lunar flyby test with a crew of 4 that will go around the moon, but without landing. And then Artemis 3 will then finally land a human crew on the moon. The long-term plan is to be able to establish a permanent base on the moon and to be able to further explore into Mars. Subsequent yearly launches will not only continue to send astronauts, but will establish a permanent working lab on the moon while we continue to set up infrastructure such as the Lunar Gateway. So you're probably thinking, why are we going to the moon? Going to the moon isn't simply a science project. Strategically, the moon has something that is essential for life: water. Lunar ice can supply oxygen for explorers, so we can survive, and can supply hydrogen fuel for deep space travel. On mining lunar ice alone, the value is expected to be over $206 billion over the next 30 years. But the moon has other natural resources that's needed to build out the space economy. For example, iron, aluminum, silicon, rare earth elements needed for building life-supporting infrastructure and components and systems. But the space economy is bigger than the moon. There is space tourism, which sounds outrageous, almost. There's PNT, positioning, navigation, and timing. There's microgravity research, which hopefully we'll talk about later. Satellite servicing and refueling. To spacecraft collision avoidance and debris removal. And much more, including commodities and futures and derivative products. You see, wherever humans are, from space stations to space hotels, we're going to need food. It's simple as that. Can you imagine you spend millions of dollars to go to a space hotel one day, you pick up the phone to get room service. Yeah, hello? Can I get a hamburger and fries on the side? And the attendant says, sorry, we don't have that. Oh, okay. Can I get a salad? Sorry, we don't have that either. Well, what do you have? Sir, we have chewing gum. Oh, actually, you know what? Your neighbor next door just ordered the last piece. I'm sorry. So yeah, it would be really nice to have food, fresh food, in space. A little bit about Astor Perkins. We're a deep tech VC that is investing in Mavericks. I'm originally from South Korea, and I remember firsthand as a child seeing this tiny half of a country from being one of the poorest nations in the world to becoming a G7 nation. And as I grew up professionally, I traveled the world, and I started to see something. That many of the challenges that we see globally, from mass migration, food insecurity, violence, conflict, can be addressed through local, sustainable economic development. That's my passion. And this is what today is about, focusing on agriculture. Unlike most of the VCs that are heavily focused on crypto, if you've been reading about crypto and some of the implosions, or Web3 and generative AI, fintech and SaaS, I believe that the new era of innovation will actually come from large-scale infrastructure on Earth and in space. The first industrial revolution created our dependence on oil and gas. The next industrial revolution will create brand new industries that will help us to transition beyond net zero. Industries such as space, nuclear fusion, green hydrogen, ag, food tech, and industrial robotics. Specifically, in climate change and sustainability, we're very bullish on commercial nuclear fusion, such as helium and general fusion, to construction and engineering tech that will help coastal cities become much more flood resilient, to quantum computing that will be able to process incredibly complex climate models, to recycling batteries in scale as we transition to electrification. Part of the reason I'm so excited to be here in Australia is that you understand infrastructure. Infrastructure building is innate in Australia, from mining iron, silver, gold, copper, ag to cattle. You get infrastructure. For many years, I've had trouble sleeping, and I could not for the life of me figure out what was going on. At best, maybe I would sleep 3 hours, 2 hours, and I tried to function. It was very difficult. I remember one time, I didn't sleep for 3 days straight. And I called my doctor. I said, "Doc, I can't sleep. Please help me." And she said, "You know, your numbers don't qualify you as pre-diabetic. You're fine." Really? I'm fine? Well, after changing 2 doctors, strapping on wearables, continuous glucose monitoring, countless blood work, it became very clear to me that I was insulin resistant. And I had all the symptoms of diabetes without the numbers. You see, what I was eating was making me sick. I love donuts. I love pastries. I love bread. My kids call me the Cookie Monster for good reason. But I realized something. I realized that food can also cure diseases, specifically plant-based diet. Bryce saw me yesterday and said, "Scott, you look so fit." You may not know this, but I'm actually wearing 2 belts because my pants are about to fall down. He said, "Scott, you look so healthy." Well, it's because I've transitioned to almost 100% raw vegetarian. It's been hard. I've not only lost 10 kilograms, but I can finally sleep at night without the burning feet sensation and the restless leg syndrome. Plants can cure diseases. And that's why we've invested in this company, a San Francisco biosciences startup that is focusing on restoring human health through nature, using the natural bioactives found in the plant kingdom. Let's take a look at the video.
I think we underappreciate the role that plants play in our everyday lives. They give us food, clothing, fuel, materials, personal care, medicine. But all of this richness comes from less than 0.1% of plant molecules. Science doesn't know what the other 99.9% of these compounds do.
Traditionally, trying to generate knowledge out of plants is very hard. Plant genomes are incredibly complex. They can be double, triple, 8 times the size of human genomes. But at Brightseed, we know the one way to find better answers faster is advanced computation, and that's why we built Forager.
Forager is a computational intelligence that helps us illuminate the world of plant compounds at a much deeper level and at a speed much faster than human intelligence. We go around the world and source plant species and go through a systematic process of preparation.
We do finer and finer fractionations to try to capture as purified sets of compounds as possible. Then we feed them into Forager and generate data. The other component is we teach Forager decades worth of high-level biomedical research to take that information on plants and map it to the world of human biological systems and make those connections that we can't see.
It performs similar to a Google search engine. Instead of indexing the world's information and the world's websites, Forager indexes the information of plants and their compounds. You can search for a health benefit and go directly to a hotspot. Forager already found a bioactive compound that is critical for maintaining a healthy metabolism, and it did so 10 times faster than traditional research. In a matter of months, it has mapped hundreds of thousands of molecules. Soon, it will reach millions. We can, of course, apply those to health, but also many places in which we can benefit going from synthetics to naturals. It will transform industries entirely, even biology and how we think about the plant kingdom. And that, in turn, will transform human society for generations to come.
They represent another example of a Maverick. So what else are we looking at? We're looking at private space stations. Voyager Space and NanoRacks and many other competitors are looking to replace the aging International Space Station. I don't know if you've read recently, but one of the issues with ISS on a practical level are two. One is it smells incredibly bad. It's kind of like an outdoor porta potty that's just been out in space for too long. And second issue is they have way too many cargo and they can't even get through opening it, let alone setting up for experiments. So it is beyond usable at this point. It needs to be retired. We're also looking at robotics and new forms of transportation here on Earth, but also in space. Lunar intelligence that can help us to precisely identify the location and the size of lunar ice, as well as minerals. To new forms of food without the need for sun or land. To quantum computing and quantum networks that will usher in a new era of computing. Now let's explore the power of inspiration from distant domain. Let me ask you, how can the distant domain of laser physics help revolutionize the stem cell industry? Gene therapy is a growing field that genetically modifies cells to treat diseases such as Parkinson's disease. Induced pluripotent stem cells, or iPSC, is a process that takes common cells, transforms them into specialized cells, such as for heart or for liver. Currently, the development of iPSC is incredibly manual, expensive, and not scalable. A biologist has to manually grow the right cells on a petri dish and then create it into batches. And because the cells were not from her body, the patient's body, that patient will need immunosuppression for life. So you would think that the breakthrough came from expert biologists, right? No. It came from a team of physicists who specialize in tiny lasers, not stem cell therapy. By applying a semiconductor approach, they're able to scale iPSC. You see, instead of a biologist manually growing these cells, Celino Biotech, their machine learning, along with their lasers, are able to grow the desired cells while eliminating the unwanted ones, running 1,000 processes per second. And because the cells are from the patient, there is no immune rejection issue. Their tech promises the development time of iPSC from years to weeks, while lowering the price from $1 million to $10,000 USD. Wow. So how can the distant domain of space help inspire and enhance agriculture here on Earth? In deep space, we won't always have a sun for photosynthesis or a ready source for water. Soils have an extraordinary capacity to store, recycle, transform nutrients. And 95% of all our food comes from soils. But what happens when there's no fertile soil? Matter of fact, in deep space, there might not be even land at all. Deep space represents some of the harshest conditions for agriculture. Harmful radiation that can damage the plant DNA, microgravity, lighting, pressure, temperature, to name a few. If you can grow plants in space, outer space, we can be hopeful that we can overcome challenges that we face here on Earth. Then there's the aspect of mental health of astronauts. Nature is critical to our health and happiness. See, in space, we're not going to have the things that we take for granted here on Earth, such as trees, plants, or wildlife. There won't be anything that gives us any semblance of Earth. I mean, there's a reason why some of the happiest nations spend so much time in forests and outdoors. Plants also play a major role in long-term duration missions by providing food, producing oxygen, removing carbon dioxide, and purifying water. NASA has been researching controlled environment agriculture for decades that combines plant science with environmental controls to optimize plant growth inside a closed structure. And these systems filter contaminants from water. They deliver the exact nutrients. They provide lighting all year round and provide ambient control for humidity and temperature to prevent diseases. NASA has been researching space farming with the intention of supplementing packaged diets for astronauts. And their experiments have included everything from plant cultivation, ambient environmental issues, low gravity, lunar soil, to longevity of seeds. Now you're looking at one of the experiments. It's called the veggie system that has grown 15 different plants on the ISS. And the passive orbital nutrient delivery system, or ponds, works alongside the veggie system to be able to monitor a baseline microbial data of plants grown specifically in the International Space Station. And last year, Expedition Crew 68 on ISS expanded the crop variety to include dwarf tomatoes and focused on the quality of light and the quality of fertilizer on fruit production. Microbial food safety, nutritional profile, taste, and the overall health benefits of having fresh food in space. Here's another experiment. This is called Advanced Plant Habitats, which is a fully automated device that studies the physiology of how plants grow in space. It's fully automated using cameras and sensors. And it evaluates water recovery, distribution, the atmospheric contents, moisture, and temperature. This is called the pesto experiment. And they basically grew wheat plants to understand how microgravity affects plant growth in space. And they figured out that microgravity alters leaf development, the plant cells, and chloroplasts that's used in photosynthesis. But it didn't harm the plants overall. Matter of fact, the plants grew 10% taller compared to those on Earth. The issue is that the current space-based plant systems are small. They use these particulate media-based water and nutrient delivery systems that, frankly, aren't very good at scaling. So they need to come up with a solution for scaling production. And that's where Sierra Space comes in. And they're developing a concept called the Astor Garden large-scale vegetable production system, so that they can produce fresh vegetables in space for a crew of 4. Also referred to as X-Roots, they're trying to test critical elements of the Astor Garden using hydroponics and aeroponics without the need for soil, making scaling possible. NanoRex, with the financial support from the UAE, is building out orbital greenhouses with the intent of growing resilient crops in space. And their objective is to grow these new DNA-modified varieties that will have higher yield, better nutritional profile, resistance to diseases, and be able to tolerate higher temperatures in space. Now, if I've done a good job, your head's kind of spinning a little bit and wondering, I think I do want that refund after all. Well, coming back down to Earth, we're only starting to see the benefits and the insights derived from space farming. And the lessons learned are inspiring a new generation of farmers. After decades of NASA research, the indoor vertical farming industry grew dramatically in the 1990s, and that the vertical farming market is expected to reach $7.3 billion by 2025. Now, these vertical farms are ideal for leafy greens, herbs, mushrooms, in or near urban or arid environments. Other startups are also starting to take hint from the power of inspiration from this domain. research in soil microbiology of plants in space is helping to spur innovation here on Earth. Raise your hand if you've heard of a startup called Pivot Bio. That is a unicorn. Right. Their biological nitrogen fixation binds to the plant's roots to feed the crop. There are other startups, such as Upper Farm, that is harnessing the power of microorganisms. Now, Upper Farm is actually quite interesting because they're actually growing fish and plants at the same time. Let me explain. So in aquaponics, these striped bass grow. And above the fish are plants. The waste of the fish, coupled with the combination of specific microbiomes in the soil, supercharges the nutrients for plants. The result is healthy and delicious green leaf vegetables while you're still farming fish. Nothing goes to waste. And their unique IP is their growing database of crop-specific microbiome that will produce the highest yield. There's another startup that's taking a hint from the power of distant domains, evokeAG. They're actually applying the drug discovery process that identifies new compounds, not to make drugs, but to protect crops from pests and diseases. The opportunities are limitless. According to PitchBook, $1.2 billion was invested into vertical farm startups in 2021, and we expect that number to grow over time. At the beginning, I told you that I would share a story of an Australian maverick. His name is Jack Carmody, and he manages one of the largest and remote cattle stations in Western Australia. And as you can imagine, there's really no mobile coverage. And for him to actually send a text message, he has to travel 170 kilometers. Oh, and did I tell you that his property is 1 million acres? He did something. But it's not what he did initially, it's what he did afterwards. He got NBN satellite. But this maverick just kept on pushing. He's like, this isn't good enough. So he set up a 13-meter tower to provide coverage to the southern half of Prenti Down Station. He didn't stop there. He said, okay, now what can I do? He said, okay, I'm going to set up remote monitoring so I can check and see my cattle, my live cattle, as well as check the stock water remotely, all from the comfort of his home, 1,000 kilometers away. You heard earlier some incredible presenters, sponsors, leaders, and they told you that technology isn't about technology. Technology is secondary, tertiary to humans. We don't embrace technology just because they're technology. Sometimes the Maverick approach isn't about space age or adopting something that's futuristic. Sometimes there are practical solutions to some of your thorniest problems. The point, if you hopefully listened, is that my point is that the key today in my speech isn't about space at all. It's about taking inspiration from distant domains or industries or sectors to help you to think from a fresh perspective about how you farm. and be open to experimenting. I want to challenge you to think about someone in your life that is a maverick. Perhaps it's your mom, or maybe your dad, who woke up before sunrise, worked 365 days, rain or shine, to care for the farm. Think about the heroes in your life and the legacy that you want to leave behind. Now, somebody get this bloody Yankee off the stage.
This is how legends are made.
Mr. Scott, Amyx, Scott. Let's not get this bloody Yankee off the stage yet. I want to read a few comments. I've been following the hashtag evokeAG on Twitter, and a couple of things that really stuck out. So, Gillian Fennell, of course, is connected in remote outback South Australia, and I think she hits the nail on the head, and a few people would be thinking this. As a producer, it's a real challenge to hear what some might consider really out there thinking when we spend our lives looking down at the dirt. I can tell I'm going to spend a lot of this day being profoundly uncomfortable in a good way. I mean, for you right now, hearing that, like what does that elicit, and how do you, what do you want to say to this group, particularly those who are really out there working on the land?
Well, I think one of the things I did was I spent some time speaking with some of you, matter of fact, and I want to thank you for that. And the key takeaway was that it was all about return on investment. So as a VC, I don't invest in just novel tech. I invest in things that's going to have monopolistic power and incredible market share. It has to be about ROI. And during the fireside chat, I'm hoping to talk about some of these opportunities that are very much practical and will get you the return on investment.
Well, let's do the fireside chat. Professor Matthew Gillingham is Australian at the forefront of these groundbreaking efforts. Matt, I want to read one of these tweets to you right now. This is from Belinda Lay. Belinda is a dead set legend, 2019 WA AgriFutures Rural Award winner, mixed farmer, sheep and grain. And she said on Twitter just before, mind blown. The next frontier is to mine resources on the moon. I'm not sure if I'm in awe or if I'm horrified. Hashtag evokeAG. I mean, that's setting the scene. I mean, I feel like you would be more in the space of, well, you'd be balancing the awe and being horrified, and maybe gives a sense of your work and the work that Australians are doing in this space.
Thanks, Bryce. And yeah, fantastic talk, Scott. I think you outlined the Artemis mission well. So in 2019, it was announced, and it became quite clear early on that we're great at building rockets. We can get, in fact, we've got the rovers, we've even got a drone on Mars at the moment, but the ability to keep people alive deep in space, it's simply not there. So we really have this initiative, if we're going to be able to feed people in this closed system of space, remote from Earth, Mars, we can probably get some resupply. But then if you're talking about that 3-year round trip to Mars, 18 months on the surface, 9 months basically traveling both ways, in the closed system of space, you think about applying those kinds of technologies where you don't have resupply from Earth, you have to use every single molecule there, you can't bring new things with you, you're going to have to redevelop your systems to allow food production to occur, but not only food production, but things like medicines on demand. Just imagine if you get sick 9 months from Earth, you can't, dial up the doctor. You might have the runabout a bit with your doctors there for a while. But the issue is, can we develop new technologies? Can we dial up a DNA sequence, put it into an organism and produce on demand? I think the synthetic biology movement is speaking to that, and I think there's great opportunities there. And certainly when plants are the basis of all life on Earth, they'll be the basis of all life in space as well. I'm very interested to hear about your no light, no plant food production. We can talk about that later. But the opportunities there to really use the lens of space to innovate here on Earth to improve the sustainability piece are massive. And I'll just briefly run through, because we've been able to raise some capital, $90 million for a 7-year centre to connect multiple partners from around the world. So it's not only us that believe, and well, we know that we cannot yet have the technologies to be able to feed people remote from Earth, and there are multiple partners involved. So we have 5 foundational Australian universities, we have universities from all across the world, we have space agencies, so NASA are a key partner, plus Axiom that are replacing the space station. By 2030, we have controlled environment agriculture partners, we have technology providers across Australia, we have government, defence particularly interested in the technologies, and we have education, that inspiring piece. You go into a classroom, you talk about space, and it really engages people, and then you can start to talk to them about anything, whether it's agriculture here on Earth, whether it's medicine, all kinds of things, but that hook of space, and they really get inspired. So this is what it looks like, perhaps, on Mars in the 2040s, and yeah, we have that plant connection. We have people are remote from Earth, they need the, that satisfaction they get from seeing plants, that integration with nature. But it's about, can we make zero waste agriculture? Can we use every single piece of that plant? Can we produce medicines in those plants on demand, within hours of someone getting sick? Can we produce these plants into multiple flavors, into multiple forms with different textures? We know about the plant-based food movement. We have food chemists working on this to produce a whole variety of really deep nutrition plants that can serve people, the psychology of people deep in space. Law, we haven't even worked out the framework for how the legal aspects of IP works in space. So it's a multifaceted problem that's going to take a long-term research effort from multiple partners, forming those synergies. And our own particular centre, which is funded by the Australian Research Council and multiple people around the world, it's not a closed shop. We're open for business by the end of the year, and we're looking for new partners to invest in us, to increase the capacity to make what is an incredibly difficult grand challenge possible. And maybe we'll talk about a little bit in the chat about how space, really those innovations can feed everyday life. You mentioned iPhones. I mean, without space, NASA's research, we wouldn't have camera phones, we wouldn't have laser eye surgery, we wouldn't have certain air filters that use in hospitals. It's just amazing the kinds of technologies. Over 2,000 spin-offs from space technology.
And you're an Adelaide boy as well. I mean, this is something about Adelaide and its connection to space and tech. There is extraordinary work happening here, but I have to also say, I feel like the work you're doing right now is not known well enough yet. I mean, it's extraordinary work.
Thank you. Yeah, well, Artemis was only announced in 2019. We've had that runway, but without that framework and without a space agency here in Australia that is based in Adelaide, then the real pull for us to do those kinds of things and invest in space technology to then bring it back home, that's the important thing. We're not just being frivolous here. It's a massive grand challenge. It's going to be a new dawn of humanity, putting people on Mars in the 2040s. People still talk about the moon landings. We're going to be talking about that in 20, 30 years' time when people go to Mars. But the essential part is about bringing those technologies back here on Earth and informing practice.
Look, given the immense delays flying domestically in Australia right now, I'm not sure if I want to do a Mars trip just quite yet. But the opportunity, though, is immense. And Scott, when you come to Maverick and distant domains, let's come to some things that would be on the minds of people who are working in farms and in agriculture, so climate change, which, I mean, it's currently viewed really as a challenge and often a cost centre as well. But you have a different perspective. So you see that there are brand new opportunities when it comes to climate change and industries when you start to think about space. And that could create wealth and that could create massive transformations. So set that scene, and how is that possibility relevant to agriculture?
Yeah, sure. One of the things that Australia has always been a great leader is how they supported new industries. So as we speak, Australia has become a very critical source for lithium, which I would imagine most of you are familiar with in terms of some of the chemistry needed for battery production, for instance. So in the U.S., we've passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which has really spurred a host of infrastructure building, from green hydrogen to battery production to being able to actually produce a lot of the capabilities that currently China does, everything from refining metals and minerals to being able to actually develop the turbine blades to the solar panels on the ground in the US, as an example. So there's a lot of things, and I think Australia is going to be very much at the heart of it. There was a chart that I shared, wasn't sure if I was going to make it onto this panel, but it showed the possibility of drought situation in East Asia, Southeast Asia, and Australia. And what it shows us is opportunity over time where much of East Asia, Southeast Asia may have food security issues. And they may be desperately looking to Australia to provide fundamental foods because their homeland is flooded. But the thing that I want to talk about briefly, if I may pivot a little bit, is two things. One is data. Many of you are already using things like Ag World. And I think data is a very generic terminology, but I think where space and other new technologies come in is the different modalities of data sets, varieties of data that you didn't have before, as well as this other superset layer that's going to have different types of artificial intelligence for pattern recognition, so that you can start to identify, how do I best use my chemicals, given the fact that there's inflation, there's higher costs. I don't want to just randomly spray, thousands of kilometers. I want to be able to be smart about how I spray with the latest technology and with AI, so that I'm making sure I get the best return on my investment. A real quick comment, I'll pass it back to you. On the satellite side is, again, similar to the nomenclature of data, is that satellite, while it has existed for decades, the new era of satellite that we're talking about is significantly, fundamentally different. They're CubeSats. They're basically smaller than a shoebox. Some are even smaller than your fist. And they're not only are they providing new capabilities in terms of hyperspectra, metaspectra, but it's significantly lowering your cost structure and the ability to be able to see your soil, see your crop, see your water, and not just a couple of times a day, but literally on the minute, because you have a building massive constellation that can have those views. So the modality and the quality of the data set is going to significantly increase. And then if I have a moment before we wrap up, is I want to talk about the implication of Starlink, because that's critical for the work that you're doing here.
Matt, let's go to the Australian producers at the moment, and how does it practically connect to the here and now of Australian ags? If we think of this space ag, what does it mean about now, today?
What it means is that certainly it speaks to both the controlled environment agriculture industry, which is rapidly growing. There's a number of parties here that are in this area, and we have contact with local companies that are setting up all the time here in Australia. So this is a rapidly expanding industry. It speaks to the biomanufacturing industry, so making medicines, making plastics, fully recyclable plastics in plants, making high-value products, and that is going, well, it's predicted to be a $30 trillion US industry by 2030. One report out of the US suggests that, or up to that value. It's ridiculous, these kinds of things. And this is an opportunity to use molecular science, plant science, linked with agriculture to make high-value products to improve sovereignty and the like. It is only going to supplement traditional forms of agriculture. We're not talking about complete replacement of broadacre agriculture through controlled environment agriculture. It's not about that at all. It's not about replacing all cattle farms with little, if you like, little cattle growing in with roots in vertical farms. But it's supplement and it's new opportunities.
We've only got a few minutes left, and so I really want to jump forward for a moment and imagine that we are 10 years on from now, so evokeAG 2023. Scott is now a permanent resident of Adelaide because he knows it is the greatest city in the world, and he's loving his 20-minute drives everywhere, and the beautiful wine and the beautiful coffee. And he's drowning in opals as well, and other bits, and he barracks for the Adelaide Crows. We're at Evoke. Like, what are we talking about? What are the big issues of this moment 10 years from now? How does this conversation come together?
So I'm actually really excited about that question because one of the issues that I think Southern Australia, as an example, has had chronically is lack of good connectivity. So with SpaceX's Starlink, we can start to really see some massive game-changing landscape, which means that the capabilities and things that were not possible before will become very possible, not just in Southern Australia, but hopefully throughout Australia. And further, is that for those of you that are not as familiar, SpaceX currently flies something called Falcon 9, which has about 17 metric tons of cargo space. The Starship, which is the massive beast Starship that they're building, will have 100 metric tons. That's more than 5 times the current carrying capacity. And it's expected that you can actually put the entire Eiffel Tower inside this Starship, disassembled. The reason that's important is because it means that in 10 years from now, AgriFutures, elders, many other companies, producers alike, will be able to easily afford the opportunity to literally send out a satellite or a series of satellites for their purposes. That means that space isn't just something lofty and abstract and metaphysical. It becomes very attainable and accessible because the cost structure is coming down. So connectivity and access to space and all the opportunities around the kind of data varieties and velocities that I'm talking about. And I think 10 years is going to be very exciting, and especially with the center and the work that Matthew is going to be doing. I'm very excited.
If we come to 10 years from now, your centre is the most famous ARC-funded centre in Australia. It's a household name by this point. What are we doing at Evoke? What are we talking about?
That's right. So the centre is on its runway period. It starts officially now, later this year, but we will be coming to our second phase.
Right.
We'll have already, by 2030, we will have our established base on the moon, obviously as humanity, and we'll be really developing those technologies, those innovations, where we can basically put in place the delivery of those medicines on demand. But that's technology we don't have yet. That's going to be changing the way we think about the delivery of medicines and the like. We're going to be thinking about new materials made out of plants. But excitingly, through that period of time, we'll have been developing new things that we haven't even conceived yet. There'll be spin-off technologies. So I'd like to think that some of the things that we're talking about, we can't even conceive of now that have come out of technological development over the next few years. But very exciting times, and looking forward to coming back to Adelaide in 2030. I guess that's where we are. So.
And I can see John Harvey down the front, the Managing Director of AgriFutures. He's very excited about doing an Evoke on a space station at some point. I can see him just doing the calculations right now. So when you mentioned some satellites, John looked like he freaked out for a moment. He's like, are we going to do satellites? No, we can do it, John. We can do it. Can you please put your hands together for Matthew Gillingham, Professor Matthew Gillingham, and Scott Amyx for that sensational presentation.